projects going at this point?
Great.
Ugly and great. Okay. Sarcastic. Great. How are they looking at this point? John, you have a pretty positive attitude.
Why not?
No, that's good. That's awesome. Yeah.
So I gotta try to make it up somehow. I like how even your answer is like, and you better bring negatives to me. Why not? I don't know why. That's how I stay positive. Make other people tell me what negative shit.
I think up until this point, though, like every project we've worked on, the look of it hasn't been quite more past like text on a page, right? And a big reason for that is we've yet to really cover any CSS. With this lecture, though, it's going to be like a brief intro to CSS. CSS is quite expansive. There's a lot to it. You could spend 15 weeks just working on learning CSS. But here we're just going to do like barely scratch the surface. We'll talk about like what it does, why it's important, different ways to assign CSS and apply it, and then we'll go over some like niche things like the box model, floats, clears, CSS grid, and then at the end we'll quickly cover like a CSS framework. So to start, does anyone know like what CSS stands for? Yeah, cascading style sheets. Thank you for the zombie monotonous type like tone. Yeah, it stands for cascading style sheets. And then who has like a pretty distinct or like quick explanation of like why do we use CSS? Like what is it for? I think everyone knows at this point, but if anyone wants to volunteer, Lindsay.
It's just like a way of styling our stuff, but it's called cascading style sheets because it's like you can give like multiple options. Like if this won't work in a specific browser, then it reverts to like a version that's more widely spread across.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, like she said, it's so we can apply styling to our website, right? At this point, everyone here, like we've basically, if we want to compare it to building a house, we've been building the house, the frame, setting the plumbing up, the electrical, everything that makes it a house. But if you step inside, it's kind of been bare walls. It's not very aesthetically pleasant. It doesn't quite feel like a home, right? And with CSS, we can paint the walls, apply trim, put carpet down, wallpaper if you're insane or 90 years old. There's a lot of different options that we can do. So basically, we can use it to add style to our webpage. And I think we've all, like, as we have used the internet, have come across some sites that look really nice. We've come across some sites that don't quite look so nice, right? And that has an impact as the client of like what our interaction is with that website. So here, for example, we have like what I think is a pretty nice representation of CSS done well. This is just a website called envoy.com. You can see like the opening, you have this nice like half-cut building of everyone's working, everyone's smiling. There's this little guy on the roof. There's no safety bars or nothing, so it's probably an OSHA violation. But we scroll down and you can see like you have this main page here that like it's complete into itself, but then there's more options when you scroll down. Everything's divided up nicely. The coloring looks good. It kind of makes you think that this is a reputable company, right? I mean, this company could just be sticks in the wall. But from looking at it here, at least this interaction has been very positive, and this is the exposure as like a potential client or customer that I have, and it's just a very well put together website. Conversely, like bad CSS is like something like this, right? Like there's a lot going on. Like this is like quantity is not necessarily quality in this regard. Have you guys ever seen like ABC Warehouse advertisements in newspapers? It kind of looks like this, right? Like jam as much as you can. They have like an advertisement here laid over top of other advertisements. For some reason, it's February, mid-February, and they have like holly still for like Christmas time up here. I do give them props. They have this cool little animation, right? Like that's probably the best part of their page, but that's what it kind of says. Like this person, I think that's a woman actually. Yes, it's kind of terrifying. But like
bad CSS. This looks like it's very difficult to do.
Well, I think it's bad from a user experience. Like, would you feel comfortable putting your credit card information into this website? Well, you live on the edge, so okay. But no, I mean, like, there's quite the difference from like my experience on this website as opposed to like this website here, right? And that kind of shows you the drastic differences of like what good CSS can be. Another example you guys might know, but if you still go to spacejam.com, this is still up and running. Like, that is a website. It's straight out of 1993, I think, 96, right? But like, the internet has changed since then. This has not, you know. One more quick thing, because I think this is fascinating. Nissan.com. What do you think we'll get here?
I love this.
This is actually Nissan.com. And this is, I'm not ripping on the guy with this because he can do whatever he wants, but his last name is Nissan. And this whole thing is now just a dedication to his fight against the Nissan Corporation, of them trying to squeeze him out of his domain. And you can click on these like no Nissan signs, and it says like, my name is Uzi Nissan. I was born in Jerusalem. Huh? Well,
like everyone else has to.
if you care to know, you can
It's
read.
pretty deep.
Yes, there's a lot of lawsuits. Let me just go back to, I don't even see like a good home button here, right? Like, home didn't take me back to
I'm
Nissan.com.
sure they probably tried to buy it before going straight to court.
So if you want to know, this is what I would not do. This drop down here, this collection, it's just a select option. But like, if you have over 500, so if you want to read the 500 pages of litigation to know like what happened here,
Only took 7 lines to write. I don't understand.
right? And like, each of them are pretty extensive.
Oh my
And like, you can see, this is really just him like ranting, right? Like, it's now clear the Nissan Motor Company is trying to pull, what they're trying to pull is wrong, and they sure as hell will get laughed at in court. So like, it's very interesting. But again, like, this isn't like, this is something completely different, but like, the CSS isn't great here, right? So, okay, back to the code. I have here a project. It's just some basic HTML, 3 different HTML pages, and then we have a folder with images. And so like, during the next 40 minutes, we'll go through, we'll just try to apply some styling. So if I go and open up the index, you can see this is what we have. And then so far, this is quite representative of kind of what your projects have looked like, right? We have like the default align left center, like the HTML gives you. We were using, the only styling we have is what's built into our HTML elements, like our H1 is bolded up here, that's H3, and then we have these links that are underlined and so forth. So as we work through this, the first question is, how do we add or CSS to an HTML page? Does anyone have an idea that you've maybe seen it done? There's 3 different ways, 3 distinct ways to do so. What's that?
Inline.
Yeah, inline styling. So for example, this H1 tag, I can state style equals, and then I can list it like a color, so an attribute, and its value. And let's say tomato, right? Save that. I don't know why that opened. And refresh, and now I've applied a styling to my header, right? A tomato color. Inline is one way to do it. What are some of the downfalls of inline styling? Like, what is the biggest downfall?
You have to set like every individual header.
Yeah, it's time intensive. I would have to go and add style color to every single thing I wanted to do, or it's children, or it's parent element, right? And then if I have a change, let's say, I have to then dig through all my HTML to see like, what do I want to change here? So that brings us to a second way to apply styling. It's called internal. So I can do this, for instance, in the header or in the head up here. I can list a style tag, style Q. Just undo, and then let's say I want to make all the P tags have a font size of like 500 pixels. It's going to be really big. Or just to demonstrate. And you can see, like, I can do it that way, right? This is like the old man at a coffee shop. Like, okay, this site's built for me, I like it. Or just anyone that, I don't want to make it an ageist thing, anyone that has bad vision. I have bad vision. This is me without my contacts in. So yeah, you can do inline styling, right? And that works, but again, you got to do that with every single HTML file you have. They could have conflicting styles. You got to copy paste. It can be overwhelming. The third way to do it is what's called external, right? And this is probably what you guys have seen the most. This is what like you'll see in Rails projects and so forth. And you have separation of responsibilities. We have our own external styles.css that we keep all of our styling in. And this is a small project, so it's pretty compact. I only have the one file. I very well could have like a site-wide styles. I could have like a home page styles, an article styles, and so forth. I have instead just decided to have comments in one file separating them all. But like for instance, you guys in your Rails projects will have a style sheet folder, and then you might have like frameworks or something that applies to everything, right? And then you might have something that applies to the user controller, whatever methods are called on there, the views that are brought up, and then like dogs or whatever your models are. So let's go ahead and let's move this style here, and let's move it to the external sheet. So I say P, and I can say text, font size. And I'll just make this, I'll make it 500 again. I'll change it in a second. I'm just using pixels. There's other things like percentage or rem or EMs that you can use, REMs or EMs. But for now, we're just going to use pixels. And then I refresh, and you can see like, okay, it went back to whatever the built-in size is for a paragraph, right? Why is that? Well, we got to hook up our styles external sheet to our HTML file. We have to let it know which style sheet to use. And to do that, again, in the head, you can just list link and add unpopulated. It says relation style sheet, and I just list styles.css, right? Because it's in the same level of folder. And then I can confirm if it's hooked up, it should blow up again. Sweet.
It's in the same level.
Yeah, it's in the same level. So if it was in another folder, let's say if it was in like a folder up, I could do like get out of the folder and then go into another folder. But it just happens to be, simple project. It's everything's parallel on the level it's at. Let's change this to 20 though. Cool. So you see this p tag and this p tag got changed to 20 at this point. So let's go and add these. So we have inline, internal, external. Cool. You'll notice too, we have what are called CSS selectors. And when I write these, I put I've been using a P here, right? I've been using a selector to denote which CSS rule I want to apply to whatever selector I have. What has that? And this is with the P tag, what type of selector would I be using there? Yeah, I mean, that's like higher level. What would you call that? Like, what's a div? What's a P? What's a... Yeah, it's an HTML element, right? That is one type of selector you can use. So for instance, we're using the P tag. So I'll just write HTML element. And for instance, you can have like a div, a P, an A, a span, ECT, right? What would be another one? So if we look at our site here, let's say we want to expand the size of this whole div that this thing's in. If we go to the HTML page, I can see the U.S. National Park. We have this color here. I'm going to delete this. But we have a class on the div, right? And that would be another way, that would be another CSS selector. We could use the class to denote the class. And to do so, that has a class of header. And this is in the home page. I can just list a period for the class. That denotes class, and then I list the class name, right? And then let's say I wanted to give this a height of 400 pixels. Boom. And you can see the size didn't change, but that was in the div, which includes an H1. And so if I click here and inspect, that div itself is this whole thing. And I made it 400 in size. So class is another way. And let's do a few other things. I'll give it a color, and I'll just say pink at this point. Oh, I want to give it a background. I give it a color. It only applied it to the text. I'll give it a background color. There we go. So that's the whole div. And now let's say the font. I want to change the font here only. There's another way I can add a different CSS selector. And you'll notice that each of these were kind of getting more specific. We started with an HTML element. We've moved down to a class selector. What would be logically the next step? What's more specific than a class that you can assign to an HTML element?
ID.
an ID, right? Many elements can have the same class. Only one element can have that ID. So we have an ID selector here. I'm going to fill this out. So we have class. ID. An ID is denoted with an octothorpe, or like a hash, £, whatever you want to call it. So I can list here, if I go to this element, H1, and I set an ID equal to, say, main page title. I can then use that ID to assign rules to it. And let's say like font family, sans serif. And when you write, so you write CSS, the basic rules are you state the CSS selector first, followed by, so like selector, and then by opening and closing curlies, and then you write your attribute on one side, and then its value on the other. And then you follow it, you end it with a semicolon, right? So just, those are kind of most of the rules with CSS. If we leave this off and we try to type in something else, let's say like font family and like color, you'll see white. That's actually colored it. Let's see if it works. No. But if I put this semicolon in, now it's white, right? And let's make this size bigger. 100 pixel. Sweet. One quick side note with like CSS selectors is that there is a hierarchy of like precedence, of like rules, right? The more specific you get, and this is kind of like the cascading effect, right? The more specific you are, that is the rule that will be applied over top of any other previous rules on there. So if I have like A tags listed as color blue, and then I have a class on a particular A tag that is like blue class, and I have that color, pink class, and I list in that .pink class and the color's pink, that tag will be pink, right? Furthermore, if I have an ID that says orange class, and it has signed an ID of orange class, and that color is orange, that orange is going to override. You can see here I have a quick guide of like CSS selector and their description, and this is in order of least amount of precedent to highest amount of precedent, right? So here you have inherited styles, which would be if I have a div, or if I have a p tag inside of a div, and I have a style assigned to that div, the p tag will inherit that style. That's the inherited one. This star is very similar. Like I could do star everything. That would just be the whole page would be this, right? I then have an element, which we talked about, like a p tag, span, an attribute. So I might say like name equals Nick, and then I can set CSS selector of like name, where name is Nick, assigning these characteristics. Then you have class, ID, combined selectors, so you can actually write them together, right? If I have a header that's a p tag with the class header, like this is getting more specific, right? And then inside of that, I also have an a tag that's like extremely specific. So that's kind of like a combined selector. And then you have CSS properties directly on the element. So this is an inline styling. So inline will overrule all of those. That's kind of dry. That's kind of a lot to know offhand. There's like more of an interactive thing here I found that's like Star Wars based, right? So it's, I think it's called like Specificity Wars or something. So you can see here like A would, like just a selector would just be a stormtrooper. As you move through, you have like Darth Maul with the class. You have Vader with the, the more powerful you go, like the more specific it is. You have Vader with the hashtag. Then you have the Emperor with like an inline styling. And there's something you can do that's like overrides everything. That's the Death Star down here, and that's by putting an exclamation point important, right? That's helpful with like debugging, or you might have something that like this will literally like break my site in terms of looks if it's not implemented. So like don't change it, and you might assign that like highest importance. I would say for this aspect, like you don't include any of it in your code. You can use it just for debugging aspect, but that might be about it. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna close this out. And this, and this, and that. All right, so we're back to our page here. So let's say I want to change it. The pink looks a little odd. We have these pictures that we can use. So I can set like a background image and list a URL link, and I have this header image.jpg, right? And now there's different things you can do here. So what this is doing is just pulling from my images folder, and in there I have this header image here. And then I can assign a few other properties on here. I can state, let's say background position. I have no, there we go. And I want to say center, and then background size, and say cover. And with the size, I'm just telling it to, here I can leave it without first. Now it's centered, and with cover, I'm just saying like go the full width of it, right? Like cover the whole element space. Sweet, it's looking a little better already, right? Now if I want to like center everything here, there's many ways I can use like a star that applies everything. I can also use the body, because everything in my HTML is all within the body, right? So I can create a tag here of just body, which is an HTML element. And let's say I do text align. And let's just give it a background color of like white smoke. Sweet. Like that's looking a little better already. There's a lot, like there's not much value in writing down like the text align, all of that. Even a lot of the parameters or the attributes I have to always look up because there's an abundance of them. However, that information is all pretty readily available online. So we have everything looking a little better. We do have like this text here, however, that's kind of bleeding all the way to the edges. So if we look at how we have that set up in our HTML, let's close this. You'll see that everything is in, we have this intro, right? And so I can add in like padding for this. I can use the class intro, and let's say padding, it's 20 pixel, border 5 pixel, solid black, margin is 100 pixel, and let's just say background color, peach puff. Okay, this is a lot I just added here, right? But if we look now, I've done a lot to this. And the question is, okay, I've used padding, I used margin, like what was all of that, right? And so you can inspect it with the Chrome tools, and it's actually a very useful tool they give you with the box model view. The box model, like every element can be defined as like a box, right? Every single element is a box unto itself. And within there you have the content. So starting from the center out, you have the content, you have the padding, you have the border, and then you have the margin, right? And we can even see that here. If I inspect this element, so this is the intro. Let's make this a little smaller down here. Can you guys see the box up down here okay? Okay. So if I hover over, this is the content. Everything that's blue is the content. Everything that is green is the padding. The border is the outline, like brown color border, and everything outside is the margin, which is like that peach color here. People might often get confused, like what's the difference between padding and border? It's just that everything inside the border is padding, everything outside the border is margin. And so for instance, if I wanted to change the padding here from 20 to 40, you can see it's moved over just that left-hand side here, right, in the padding. There's now more here than there is over here. Does that all make sense? Okay. So let's change that back though. One more thing I want to do, like I had this link down here, maybe I'll make it a button, right? So I'll go back into the HTML. Right, and then I have a button. Still looks a little like plain, right? It's pretty skinny, so I can go through here and let's say if I add in a button selector, and I can say, let's say think I had text size here. I'll give it a padding, 20 pixel. Right, so like I can expect, I've given a padding of 20 pixels, so this border should be expanded out, right? And we see like indeed it is here. So there's 20 pixels all the way around the edges. And then I can be more specific, and if I want that A tag, default A tags have decoration under them, which is like a highlighted, and I can list text decoration and set that to none. So button, and then I can be more specific and say A. Text decoration is none. And let's say color is black. Font size. We'll see how that looks. Cool. So now it's no longer blue or underlined, and then I can increase the font. Maybe say like 20 pixels. Sweet. So like already it's kind of looking a lot better than it was initially, right? We can go through, this is like the Grand Canyon, it's kind of like a show page here. It's just one particular thing. But again, it's being centered because we also have that style sheet hooked up to the other HTML. So if I look at Grand Canyon, I have that style sheet listed here as a link. And because I have the whole body centered, that's why you see everything centered here, right? But if I want to do more of like a text wrapping and move this image to the left, there's something you can do called float. And that's essentially what that does. It's used for text wrapping, and it says, right now this element takes the whole page, just move it to like the left position would be float left. Or I could also move it right. So let's look here what that image is. And I have it in a class called Grand Canyon Image. And let's just say float left. Cool. Boom. Now let's just maybe give that image, let's say width. I think they are 400 pixels, but I'll just list it in case. And okay, so things are aligned all right, but maybe we like want to kind of minimize the overall size of everything, so it's not just the entire width of the page. We have everything here. It's in a class called article body. No, actually we have it wrapped up in a wrapper. And you might see this a lot, like divs inside of divs inside of divs, and like overall you might have a wrapper, and that's usually so you can just assign like a general CSS rules to like the whole everything inside that div. So if we take this class wrapper, and we can say like a width, 960 pixels, right? And now we've kind of shrunk it down to size. And then we can say margin, and like one way we can center it is by saying margin 0 auto. And when you have things like color, size, margin, padding, any of that, you can be like specific and use padding left and set that attribute. You can also just say padding, and you can give it 4 different values, and it's always going to start like a clock. It will start at the top. So the first value will be the top padding, second will be the right padding, third will be the bottom, fourth will be the left, right? If you pass it 2 values, it assumes that the top and the bottom are the same and the left and the right are the same. So what we're saying with margin here is that we want the top margin and the bottom margin to be 0 and the left and the right to be auto, which will effectively center it, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And you can see like that's what we're doing here. Let's put a border around here. Say 5 pixel, solid and black. Cool. All right, so we can see right now everything kind of runs right into the border. Any volunteers of like what we can do to kind of change that, make it a little bit like more, not like crammed in together?
Padding.
Yeah, we can add padding. And what would I want to add padding to? And actually, let's inspect this. So this is my wrapper, right? And then the wrapper. Yeah, and we can even like try it out here. So if I go to padding, and let's say I add Let's say 40 pixel here, 40 pixel here. Like it's already looking better, right? And then 40 at the top. Yeah, so it looks like padding on that overall in the class wrapper. All right. Sweet. Do you guys see anything else like we might want to change here? Like what sticks out? Looks a little wonky?
Can you go back into the inspect for just a second?
Yep.
So I'm a little confused on, so like, is there a way in that inspect field, because like you were like, oh, it's obviously in the wrapper, but like I didn't see in the inspect field, did it say wrapper, or is that just something that you do?
Oh no, good question. I had highlighted the wrapper here, right? Because if I go inside, then my wrapper includes the image, the article body, and the park info, but I want to apply that class to everything inside of there, so I'd go out to the wrapper here.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and when I had that highlighted, you see my box model down in the bottom right updated?
Yeah.
And now I'm looking specifically at that wrapper. Yep. And that's a good way to kind of, before you just like write code and go like write something in VS Code, go back and look at it, you can just play around with it inside of here, just like anything you guys have been doing with the dev tools. All right, cool. There's two things I see here, right? Like I see this park information is kind of off to the side while the rest of it's down below. There's something like with floats. Essentially, if an element still, after an element has been floated, if the next element can still like be within that, if there's enough space to put it in line, it will carry it over, which is what's happening here. There's something you can use called clear that kind of resets that. It says, okay, the float, any float apply left and right, clear of those rules, and center it how you would normally for a div. So if we take a look at where that element is, it's in a class called park info. So we can set another styling here with that class. And then do clear both. Right. And then maybe one last thing is like we want to bring all of this text is kind of butting up right against the image. What would be a good way, like what would be one way I could put some space in here?
Put padding just on one side of the image.
Yeah, I could do a padding right on this image, right, and give it a little more space, clear it out. I can also do margin as well. I'd probably use margin just so it's not like inside the border. And so if I go back to that image, I can say margin, and you can see I can use margin. I could just say margin and do 0, 10, 0, 0. But I can, that's just kind of like odd to write it that way. I could use a more specific margin right and say 10 pixels. Sweet. All right, well that's looking pretty good. Lastly, we have this gallery here of all of our images, and everything right now is just kind of laid out like as the image is, right? And if I look at the HTML file, I have all of the images in a div with a class of image gallery, and then all of the images individually have a class of gallery image, right? And so if I just go through and set, let's say on the gallery image, so for each image, I just give it a width of 100%. Cool. Now they're just all like full size, all the way down. There is something that's now built into CSS called CSS Grid. There's a lot to it. I just know the surface level of it. We're only going to cover the surface of it here. But essentially it allows you to like lay things out in a lot easier fashion. Rather than having to like hack through and float things left, right, maneuver them, that may change depending on like screen size. You can quickly with Grid just set some rules in place and it kind of does it for you. So let's go ahead and use that. And you want to use CSS Grid on its parent container of all the elements. You want to then state grid, grid? Oh, display grid. So the parent element is the image gallery. And then I can set display to grid. Sweet. And nothing's probably going to happen now because we then have to assign some rules. There is one rule here. We can say, you can assign rules to like the columns or the rows, we're going to say grid template column. And the idea here isn't like, don't think you need to know this. Let's say columns. It's just kind of show you like what it can do. Well, one of the few things it can do. So we'll list it as repeat and say auto. What do I have? Autofill. And then set a min max. And the min we're going to have is 300 pixels, and the max we're going to have is 1 frame. And frame is kind of, or sorry, fraction. Fraction is basically if there's 4 things in the row, one of those 4 is 0.25, it's a quarter, right? So it automatically sets to a quarter size. That's the maximum. So now you can see here, we reset, and we have right now 4 things. We have the minimum set to 300 pixels, and you can see it's responsive. If I move this, it's automatically responsive and adjusts. So what's happening is right now, like let's say this image, each image is like 380 pixels. I move it down, it's like 320, 305, 301, 300. As soon as it gets below 300, that's its min. It automatically reduces the amount of the table, right? And since it's reduced now, the min is being met still, but now you have enough space only to fill 3 at that size of browser window, right? So now it's 3 across. So 1 fraction of that is a third, and same thing when you get down to half, and then down to 1. Cool. Let's see. We can also do, I think, grid gap. If we want some spacing, and just do like 20 pixels. Cool. So like in a few like CSS rules here, we've just kind of like formatted everything. It's really nice and responsive no matter what the screen size. That is everything. We have what, 20 minutes left. That is everything here. Really quick, does anyone have any questions about what we covered? I know it's a lot. This is more of just like an exposure, it's an intro. The idea is like after, if you have further questions, you can ask us, or you can kind of do a lot of this research on your own. CSS isn't like logic based, so there's not logic rules to it really. It's more of it's a styling language. But do you guys have any questions specifically about anything we covered?
I forgot.
Okay. Well, yeah.
In your CSS sheet or folder in your app, like would it make sense to have those in different, like depending on how your app or your website looks, would you have different styles.css files?
Yeah. This is just a small project, so that's why I have them all here separated by comments, but I very easily could pull this out and do a homepage.css and then just list that as well too. That would make sense in anything that's like bigger than this, right?
And where does that live in for a Rails folder structure?
In the app, there is a style sheets folder, and then you'll see they'll end in SCSS, which I think stands for like Supreme. It's like a weird. Yeah, I can look it up. But there'll be SCSS files. This stands for sassy CSS. It's very sassy. Yeah. Oh, syntactically awesome style sheets. I don't know, but you'll see that in your Rails file.
So it all goes in that one, or
in the folder.
In that folder.
Yeah. But so there is something else now that we can move on to, which is styling frameworks, because CSS, like, you'll see a lot of it gets repeated. You might, like, what you've done in the past is maybe you can reuse code if like someone might have like 3D text style and it has all these CSS rules applied to it, and you can just use that. W3 has a lot of stuff, but there's actually styling frameworks put together that have predefined classes with predefined rules that you can then just copy and paste in. And that's kind of like the direction we're going to be going here more than likely. So one of these is Bootstrap, and you guys probably have heard of. There's Material UI, there's Semantic. So there's a few of them. We'll look at Semantic here. And so with Semantic, there's a few different ways. Like in your Rails projects, you guys could just do gem install Semantic UI, right? And that will add it to, basically you have all that the CSS rules locally on your machine, and then whenever someone does a button install, they'll have it on their machine locally. That is one way. I don't have, like, this isn't a Rails project or anything, so you can link directly using the CDN, and so that's just what I'll do here. So for instance, if I go to recipes, where's that? Here we go, CDN releases. I would just pull in this link file, just like I had before, right? That's pointed to some URL. Copy and paste below. And a lot of these, they're like animated, so they'll have some JavaScript as well wrapped up with them. So I'll pull in this script tag as well too. Cool. So if we look back at our page, and let's say we go home, and we just want to like make this button look a little different. We can use like one of the predefined buttons that they have available. So we can go to the site here, and then there's all these like cool little buttons. Let's say like we want like a like when it makes sense, but like follow. Like this positive button seems pretty nice, right? Nice and green. So you can see this button has a class of positive UI button, right? And so now that we have those, our HTML is linked to those CSS files. Since those classes are already defined, all I need to do on the button is do class and then positive UI button, right? So we update that, and you can see our button's now green. Like, and then whatever animation it has with it as well too. Pretty sweet. Let's do one other thing. Let's do a header really quick. Ooh. And I think they call them, sorry, not a nav bar. And they don't call them that. They call them menus. And you can see like some of these have animations. Well, that doesn't. Some are like accordion style. We'll just use like a plain one, like this one right here. So if we look, it's the div that the options are in, the A tags are in, has a class of UI inverted menu. So let's paste that in. Then I refresh, and now I have that menu, and then the A tags I think have its item, yeah, item as a class. So if I assign a class of each A tag as item, right? And then if I want it to be active, I think there's an active, and I can list a color after it. So like, let's say like we're on home right now, right? So I want to give the user indication that they are indeed home. So I can then include active, let's say blue. Sweet, that easy, right? And of course, because how we have this set up, I would then have to do the same when you go, like if I go to image gallery, this doesn't carry over because I've only written that in the home HTML. However, if you use like partials, or when you guys get into React, you'll be basically using like components over and over, and so you just set them once and it's available for all of them. So you might have a navbar component, or you might have a navbar partial with ERB. We do that as like this gap right here, right? And that's telling me there's like some override that I think it's on. Here, let's inspect it. That's part of the navbar then. And so there's something with the navbar where like the semantic component has some type of margin, but like we can override that if we want. So like if I go down, I have that navbar class. No, if I make a navbar class, because I think that's one of the, yeah, navbar. And then I can say bottom margin 0 pixels, and then what could I do here that I said not to do, right? Like if I list it as important, then I'll be sure to like say, oh, I'll override everything else, and that will tell me if I'm correct or not, which is not doing it. So maybe that was not correct. What did I have here? Oh, I have this wrong. Margin bottom. Cool, right? So a lot of it can be piecemeal, but for you guys, like, the normal process, like, if you can use the components like in their entirety without overriding anything, do that. But you might have to also write some custom CSS. Just be ready for some wonky things happening, and it's just a matter of, like, that's part of the learning experience to realize, oh, there's some things that, like, if you have a CSS component that you bring in from Bootstrap or you bring in from Semantic, and then you try to override, it's probably going to conflict with other rules that are underlying that you don't have access, like you don't have insight into, right? But it's fun to play around with. Do know too, like, sometimes there are rules in place that may look fine on your computer, but if you override them and, like, you adjust the screen, things might get a little weird as well. But yeah. How do you guys feel so far? Tired? CSS is a lot. Like I said, I don't know a ton of it. It's like I have, my experience with CSS has been learning when I need to use it, right? And then it can be fun too, especially when you get things working. There is kind of like a small intro level of, like, roughness. Like, there's a little bit of bump you need to climb just to get used to, like, when things are floating, when they're not inline versus block, stuff like that. But if you have questions, by all means ask, and that information is pretty relevant or pretty accessible on the internet as well, with, like, easy Google searches. Cool. Do you guys have, like, a little bit of excitement that you can, like, finally make your projects look good?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Why not?
All right. All right. Well, thank you guys. That's everything. So I'll pull a Jeb Bush and be like, please clap. I will end this recording, and then well, let me end it first before I explain why I'm not great at getting the other one working.